Why we keep missing what truly matters. Buddhist wisdom. I want to begin by saying something that needs to be said before anything else. Life is hard, and I don't mean that casually. I mean that waking up every morning and carrying the weight of everything you carry, the bills, the responsibilities, the expectations, the people who depend on you, the future you're trying to build, while the ground keeps shifting beneath your feet. That is not a small thing. That takes something from you every single day. And in the middle of all of that, you're doing your best. Maybe your best doesn't look the way you imagined it would. Maybe some days, your best is just getting through without falling apart. Maybe you lie awake at 3 in the morning wondering if any of it actually leads somewhere. There is nothing wrong with you for feeling that way. That is not failure. That is not weakness. That is what it feels like to be human in a world that never stops asking for more. And so let me be clear about what this conversation is. This is not a lecture. I'm not here to tell you that money is evil, that ambition is a sin, or that happiness is an illusion. The Buddha never said any of those things. What I want to share with you is something more gentle, and I think more powerful. Over 2,600 years ago, a man saw something about us that we still struggle to see, that we suffer not because life is cruel, but because we get swept away. We get caught in currents we don't even notice. And somewhere deep inside, in those quiet moments we try to avoid, we sense that something is missing. The Buddha didn't want you to abandon your life. He wanted you to stop being absent from it. He wanted you to stand in the middle of everything, the chaos, the beauty, the loss, and not be shaken. So here is the question I want to hold with you. Is there a way to live among all the worry, the pressure, the longing, without being swept away? The Buddha said yes. In the Lokadhamma Sutta, the Buddha said something that sounds almost too simple. The 8 worldly conditions revolve around the world, and the world revolves around the 8 worldly conditions. He named them: gain and loss, fame and disgrace, blame and praise, pleasure and pain. Think about that for a moment. What kept you awake last night? What worried you this morning? What made you feel good yesterday, and what ruined your afternoon? Almost certainly, every one of those experiences falls into one of these 8 categories. But these are not enemies. The Buddha was not saying you need to eliminate them. What he was describing is more like weather, sunshine and rain, coming and going. The Buddha himself experienced all 8. He was praised and blamed. He gained followers and lost people he loved. No one is exempt. The question was never whether the winds would blow. It was, when they blow, what happens to you? The Buddha said the ordinary person, and ordinary here doesn't mean stupid, it means someone who hasn't yet trained their mind, favors gain and opposes loss, favors fame and opposes disgrace, favors praise and opposes blame, favors pleasure and opposes pain. Being so full of favoring and opposing, they're not freed from suffering. But the wise person, encountering the very same things, reflects, I've encountered this. It's impermanent, suffering, and perishable. And because of that clear seeing, gain and loss, fame and disgrace, blame and praise, and pleasure and pain don't occupy their mind. The same winds. 2 completely different lives. And notice, the sutta does not say the wise person feels nothing. It does not say they become cold or indifferent. The winds still blow. They still feel gain and loss. They still experience praise and blame. But these things don't occupy their mind. There is a vast difference between feeling something and being occupied by it. You can feel rain on your skin without drowning in it. You can hear thunder without becoming the storm. That is what the Buddha is pointing to. Not the absence of experience, but a completely different way of standing inside it. The verse that closes this teaching says it beautifully. Desirable things don't disturb their mind, nor are they repelled by the undesirable. Both favoring and opposing are cleared and disappeared. They are no more. Now, I need to say something essential here, because this is where many people misunderstand the Buddha. He was not dismissive of ordinary life. When a young householder named Sigalaka came to him, the Buddha didn't say, "Worldly attachments are meaningless." He gave one of the most practical and beautiful teachings ever recorded, about duties between parents and children, about how a husband should serve his wife by treating her with honor, by not looking down on her, by not being unfaithful, about what it means to be a true friend, one who stands by you in need. The Buddha honored everyday life. He taught lay followers how to manage their finances wisely, how to choose good friends, how to avoid the habits that drain a household. Not because he was giving business advice, but because he saw that a stable, ethical, well-lived, ordinary life is the foundation of inner peace. He didn't tell you to stop earning a living or loving your family. He asked you to do those things fully, without being tossed between favoring and opposing until you've lost yourself entirely. Because there is a difference between engaging with the world and being enslaved by your reactions to it. Working hard to care for your family is not a waste, but spending 6 months replaying a conversation because someone hurt your feelings, measuring your worth by comparing your life to someone else's highlight reel, never stopping, not even for a moment, because you're terrified of what the silence might reveal. That is something else. That is not living. That is being lived. The 8 winds are blowing, and you're being tossed from one to the next without ever touching the ground. That is what the Buddha wanted us to see, not to feel guilty, just to notice. You might hear all of that and think, I know I get caught up, but I can't stop. And if that's what you're feeling, that may be the most honest thing a person can say, because knowing is not enough. If it were, none of us would suffer. So let's look deeper, not to assign blame, but to understand. Because the Buddha never began with demands. He began with diagnosis, like a physician who first shows you exactly what is happening inside. And once you see it for yourself, something shifts. Not because you forced it, but because understanding by its nature changes everything it touches. The Buddhist tradition identifies the deepest root of our confusion as avijja, usually translated as ignorance. But this is misleading. Avijja doesn't mean you lack information. It means you are seeing through a distortion. Imagine perfectly healthy eyes looking through frosted glass. You can make out shapes, enough to navigate, but everything is slightly off. And because you've looked through this glass your entire life, you don't realize it's there. What does this fog make us see? We look at things that are constantly changing and assume they will last. We look at experiences that can never fully satisfy us and believe they hold the key to our peace. We look at the fluid, shifting thing we call myself and believe it is solid and permanent. And so we invest our most precious resource, time, into protecting something that was never as fixed as we imagined. But the fog doesn't only distort what we see, it activates something far more subtle. In the Madhupiṇḍika Sutta, the Buddha offered a brief but dense statement about how the mind creates suffering, then entered his dwelling without explanation. His disciples, puzzled, turned to the Venerable Mahakaccana, one of the most brilliant analytical minds among the Buddha's followers, who unpacked the teaching in extraordinary detail. What he revealed is, I believe, one of the most precise descriptions of how the human mind works ever recorded. What you feel, you perceive. What you perceive, you think about. What you think about, you proliferate. What you proliferate is the source from which judgments driven by proliferating perceptions beset a person. Notice, beset a person. Not a person chooses to think. The person is overwhelmed. This is papancha, proliferation. Someone doesn't reply to your message. That's all that happened. But the mind begins, they're ignoring me. Then, I must have done something wrong. Then, I'm always abandoned. From one unreturned message, an entire tragedy is written. And you spend the rest of the week living inside it. Not inside reality. Inside a story your mind built without asking. That is not weakness. That is how the untrained mind works. And most of what we call wasting time, the ruminating, the worrying, the obsessing, the replaying of old conversations at 3 a.m, is really just time spent living inside these mental wildfires. Not in reality. In the mind's commentary about reality. And beneath it all, there is what the Buddha identified in his very first teaching as the origin of suffering: tanha, craving, thirst. He specified 3 kinds. Craving for sensual pleasures, the natural wish to feel something pleasant. Not a character flaw, but a thirsty mind reaching for the nearest relief. Craving to continue existing, the deep need to matter, to be seen, to know your life counted. Every sleepless night chasing a title, not vanity, but the vulnerable fear that if no one sees you, perhaps you don't exist. And craving for non-existence, not weakness, but exhaustion. When life is too heavy, the mind simply wants it to stop. Procrastination, numbing, avoidance. A tired heart whispering, I need this to pause. The Buddha understood every layer of this. He never condemned it. He simply said, this thirst is real and natural, but it has no bottom. You can pour your entire life into it, and it will never be full. And you deserve to know that. Not as punishment, but as liberation. Because the moment you see you've been trying to fill something unfillable, you can finally stop pouring. And here is something worth sitting with. These 3 forms of craving account for almost everything we do with our time. The hours spent scrolling, seeking pleasant sensation. The years spent building an image, seeking to become. The evenings lost to numbing, seeking escape. 3 currents running simultaneously, pulling you in different directions. None of them ever arriving anywhere. That is why you can be exhausted at the end of a day and still feel like you've done nothing that matters. So now we understand the winds. We understand the fog, the stories the mind tells, the thirst that has no bottom. But there is one more layer beneath all of it, the one almost nobody talks about. Not because it's complicated, but because it's uncomfortable. Because it touches the part of us that we have spent most of our lives carefully, tirelessly avoiding. What happens when everything goes quiet? Not the relaxing kind of quiet. The kind that descends at 2 a.m. when there's nothing to do and no one to call. What do you feel? And what do you do? Most of us reach for our phones. We turn on music. We find something, anything, to fill the space. Not because what we're reaching for is interesting, but because the silence is unbearable. Here is what I've come to understand after many years with this question. Most of what we call wasting time is not about laziness or discipline. It is about avoidance. We stay busy because we are afraid of what happens when we stop. The loneliness, the emptiness, the question, who am I if I take away the title, the roles, the image I've built? There is no shame in running. Every creature moves away from what hurts. But understanding that you are running, that is the first step toward being able to stop. And there are moments when something breaks through anyway. You notice the gray in your mother's hair and realize how many dinners you've missed chasing something you can't even name. You hear someone your age has suddenly passed away. Or maybe it's just you, sitting alone at midnight, and something whispers, "What am I doing with my life?" In Buddhism, that feeling is called samvega, a trembling urgency that arises when you see how impermanent everything is. It is not depression or anxiety. It is not giving up on life. It is something far more sacred than that. Your deepest wisdom trying to wake you up. Not to frighten you, to remind you that you are still here, that you still have time, but not forever. In the Pabbatopama Sutta, the Buddha asked King Pasenadi to imagine 4 great mountains closing in from every direction, crushing all living creatures. Should such a dire threat arise, what would you do? The king answered simply, "What could I do but practice the teachings, doing skillful and good actions?" Then the Buddha said, "I tell you, great king, old age and death are advancing upon you. Since old age and death are advancing upon you, what would you do?" And the king, this powerful ruler with armies and gold, said, "There are kings who engage in battles of elephants, cavalry, chariots, and infantry. But there is no place for such battles when old age and death are advancing. In this royal court, there is abundant gold. But there is no place for monetary battles when old age and death are advancing. The mountains are coming. They have always been coming. The question is not how to escape them. It is, knowing they are coming, how will you live? Will it be the promotion you didn't get? The argument you won on the internet? Or will it be something else entirely? Something quieter? Something closer? Something you've been walking past every day without seeing? Most of us, when samvega arises, immediately push it away, with busyness, entertainment, denial. But the Buddha says, don't push it away, let it sink in, because that single moment of clear seeing has the power to change everything. If you've stayed with me this far, I want to thank you. Not just for listening, but for your willingness to look at the winds, at the fog, at the running, at yourself. That takes a quiet kind of courage. And now we arrive at what I consider the most beautiful part of the Buddha's teaching. Not the diagnosis, the offering, the open door. The last words the Buddha ever spoke were these: all conditioned things are of a nature to decay. Strive on with diligence. Appamada, diligence, heedfulness. Of all the words available to a man who had taught for 45 years, he chose this one. And I think it contains everything. Appamada does not mean try harder or meditate 12 hours a day. It means do not sleepwalk through your life. When you eat, know you are eating, because that meal is your life, and it will never come again. When you hold someone's hand, feel the warmth, feel the pulse, because that presence is not permanent. When you are angry, know you are angry, so the anger does not make your decisions. When you are afraid, know you are afraid, so fear does not become the architect of your days. This is the spirit of the Noble Eightfold Path. Not a checklist, but an invitation to live differently. Right view. Seeing things as they are, not as you wish or fear them to be. Right thought. Inclining toward release rather than grasping, toward kindness rather than hostility. Right speech, action, livelihood. Living without harm, not because a rule says so, but because when you see clearly, harming feels like holding fire. It burns the one who holds it first. Right effort. Letting go of what needs letting go. Cultivating what needs cultivating. Right mindfulness. Being here, fully here. Not somewhere else while your life happens in front of you. Right immersion. A mind so settled that no wind can move it. In the Bhaddekaratta Sutta, the Buddha said, "Don't run back to the past. Don't anticipate the future. What's past is left behind. The future has not arrived. And any present phenomenon you clearly discern in every case. The unfaltering, the unshakable. Having known that, foster it." This does not mean don't remember or don't plan. It means don't live there. The past is a memory, useful, sometimes beautiful, but not a place you can stand. The future is an imagination, important to consider, but not a place you can breathe. The only place where your feet actually touch the ground is here. The only moment where you are actually alive is now. And when you are fully present, something extraordinary happens. The question of wasting time dissolves. Not because you've become more productive, but because when you are present, nothing is wasted. A cup of tea is enough. A walk under the sky is enough. A conversation where you truly listen, not while composing your reply, not while checking your phone, but truly listen, is enough. Not because you've lowered your standards, but because you've stopped measuring life by what you can extract from it and started meeting it as it is. Earn your living, but don't let money define you. Love deeply, but don't let the fear of loss consume the joy of having. Care about things, but don't let caring eat you alive. That is freedom, not from life, but right in the heart of it. And if you're thinking, it's too late for me, hear this. In the Dhammapada, verse 172, the Buddha said, "He who has been formerly unmindful, but is mindful later on, lights up the world as does the moon freed from clouds." Not he who was never unmindful, he who was formerly unmindful. The wasting is acknowledged. The wandering has happened. And it does not define you. The moment you wake up, that moment defines you. There was a monk named Samajana who spent years doing nothing but compulsively sweeping the monastery grounds. Not meditating, not studying, just sweeping. When he finally learned to stop the mechanical doing and start truly seeing, he attained the highest realization. Others asked why he wasn't sweeping anymore. He said, "When I was not mindful, I was all the time sweeping. But now, I am no longer unmindful." The clouds do not define the moon. The fog does not define your eyes. Your past does not define your future. And the years you feel you've lost do not erase the years you still have. You only need to do what the moon does when the clouds part. You only need to shine. And you can begin right now, with this breath, with this moment, with this willingness to simply be here, fully, without apology, in the life you already have. The door has always been open. The Buddha showed us where it is. The walking through is yours.